everyone, welcome to another episode of NISCODE video lecture series. In this episode, I'll be talking about economic reforms in India. The lecture will introduce and assess the economic reforms undertaken in India during early 1990s after 4 decades of development planning. The key objectives we are going to discuss here are: first, know the rationale behind economic reforms introduced in 1991. 2. State the key elements of the economic reform process via liberalization, privatization, and globalization. If we look at the rationale behind economic reforms introduced in 1991, we could say that Indian economy was highly regulated during the first 4 decades of economic planning, that is from 1950 to 1990. The 5-year plan objectives were focused on development of the public sector for setting up heavy and basic industries, self-reliance, import substitution strategies, nationalization, and state interventionist regime. While on one hand, it helped in setting up some key industries like SAIL, ONGC, IOC, BHEL, etc., on the other hand, it restricted the growth of private sector, private business plans, and brought about bureaucracy-led corruption, sick public sector enterprises, deteriorating trade balance, economic and financial crisis in early 1990s. India had to borrow foreign exchange from IMF and comply with the conditionality imposed by it, such as stabilization and structural stability program, reduction of trade barriers, revision of fiscal and monetary policies, active role of market and integration of the Indian economy with the world economy. In a nutshell, the 3 basic elements of economic reforms were liberalization, privatization, and globalization of the Indian economy. The key objectives of LPG strategy can be summarized as: to set free the Indian industrial economy from the hassles of unnecessary bureaucratic controls, to introduce liberalization with a view to integrate the Indian economy with the world economy, to remove restrictions on foreign direct investment, that is FDI, and also to lessen the restrictions of Monopolies and Restricted Trade Practices Act for the domestic entrepreneur, and to dilute the monopoly of public sector enterprises and encourage competition from new private enterprises and the Indian economy with the world economy. Let's move to the second objective of this lecture, that is to state the key elements of the economic reform process through liberalization, privatization, and globalization. The concept of liberalization is all about the elimination of state control over economic activities. It implies greater autonomy to the business enterprises in decision making and removal of government interference. It was believed that the market forces of demand and supply would automatically operate to bring about greater efficiency and the economy would recover. This was to be done internally by introducing reforms in the real and financial sectors of the economy, and externally by relaxing state controls on foreign investments and trade. In simple words, liberalization refers to a relaxation of government restrictions in the areas of social, political, and economic policies. In the context of economic policy, liberalization refers to lessening of government regulations and restrictions for greater participation by private entities. It is a process to remove control systems in order to encourage economic development. The economy is thrown open and the best goods and services compete in the market, and the consumer has a choice and monopolies disappear. Now we can talk about second in line, that is privatization. Privatization is an umbrella term covering several distinct types of transactions. Broadly speaking, it means the shift of some or all of the responsibility for a function from government to the private sector. The term has most commonly been applied to the divestiture by sale or long-term lease of a state-owned enterprise to private investors. But another major form of privatization is the granting of a long-term franchise or concession under which the private sector finances, builds, and operates a major infrastructure project. A third type of privatization involves the government selecting a private entity to deliver a public service that had previously been produced in-house by public employees. And this form of privatization is increasingly called as outsourcing. Regardless of the mode of privatization, the common motivation for engaging in all three types is to substitute more efficient business operations for what are seen as less efficient, bureaucratic, and often politicized operations in the public sector. Some have described the key differences as the substitution of competition for monopoly, though some forms of privatization may involve only one provider in a given geographic area for a specific period of time. But because the government almost always operates as a monopoly provider, the decision to privatize usually means demonopolization, even if not always robust, free market competition. The third in line, that is globalization, which began with the adoption of the LPG model during the economic reforms in 1990s. Globalization describes a process by which regional economies, societies, and cultures have become integrated through a global network of communication, transportation, and trade. The term is sometimes used to refer specifically to economic globalization, that is, the integration of national economies into the international economy through trade, foreign direct investment, capital flows, migration, and the spread of technology. The implications of globalization for a national economy are many. The globalization has intensified interdependence and competition between economies in the world market. This is reflected in interdependence in regard to trading in goods and services and in movement of capital. As a result, domestic economic developments are not determined entirely by domestic policies and market conditions. Rather, they are influenced by both domestic and international policies and economic conditions. It is thus clear that a globalizing economy, while formulating and evaluating its domestic policy, cannot afford to ignore the possible actions and reactions of policies and developments in the rest of the world. This constrains the policy option available to the government, which implies loss of policy autonomy to some extent in decision making at the national level. Let's sum up. India gained highly from the LPG model as its GDP increased after 1990s. In respect of market capitalization, the current ratio of total market cap over GDP for India is 103.29. But even after liberalization, privatization and globalization, the condition of agriculture has not improved. The share of agriculture in the GDP is only 16.38%. The number of landless families has increased and farmers are still committing suicide. But seeing the positive effects of globalization, it can be said that very soon India will overcome these hurdles too and march strongly on its path of development. The lesson of recent experience is that a country must carefully choose a combination of policies that best enables it to take the opportunity while avoiding the pitfalls. For over a century, the United States has been the largest economy in the world, but major developments have taken place in the world economy since then, leading to the shift of focus from the US and to the rich countries of Europe to the two Asian giants, India and China. Economics experts and various studies conducted across the globe envisage India and China to rule the world in the 21st century. India, which is now the fourth largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, may overtake Japan and become the third major economic power within 10 years. To conclude, we can say that the modernization that we see around us in our daily life is a contribution of LPG. They have both positive as well as negative impacts on various sectors of Indian economy. So we can say that liberalization, privatization and globalization have taken us a long way from 1991, which has resulted in the advancement of our country.